The hard thing about body dysmorphia is it's almost like it becomes an obsession to a certain extent, or it becomes this lens with which you perceive yourself, and you can actually start to opt out of life because of it.
How do you feel when you encounter a mirror and see your nude body? This is a charged question. I know, for me too. Maybe you find yourself like hiding parts of yourself or feeling just an aversion. If your body has changed because of injuries or a disability, pregnancy, gaining or losing weight, or aging, you may feel like your body doesn't fit a particular mold of what you consider acceptable or beautiful. And you may even feel like you need to do something about it. What I'm describing here is related to body dysmorphia. And I'm going to share with you a story about this submitted by a listener. Body dysmorphia, I'm very familiar with. I was a fat child, but lost weight when I was at university, when I was 20 years old. Now I'm 56. However, my head still believes that I'm that chubby, round, short, and dumpy little girl. I always wanted to grow up to be Daisy Duke, but at 156 centimeters tall and completely flat-chested, I knew that was never going to happen. My husband and the father of my children died in 2011. Between his death and his funeral, I lost 14 pounds in a 3-week period. My ideal weight is around 8 stone, or 112 pounds, but I have an irrational fear of regaining all that weight because it would feel like a betrayal to my late husband. So, listener, maybe parts of that resonated with you, maybe not, but this episode is all about body dysmorphia, or when you can't stop thinking about a part of your body that you think looks wrong or flawed, even if other people don't notice it at all. This can make you feel ashamed or anxious or just uncomfortable in your body. You might check your reflection compulsively, try to hide that body part or avoid being seen. This can take up a lot of space in your brain and make your everyday life feel harder. I talk with physical therapist Dr. Laura Glazebrook about the lived experience of body dysmorphia and what it's like for those with visual body differences, scoliosis, postmenopausal bodies, postpartum bodies. We explore our culture's obsession with symmetry, thinness, perfection, and how it creates shame around anything that might make us unique, how we can resist this and become more resilient so you can spend less time thinking about your body and create more mental space for joy and connection and creativity or rest. Stop or reduce your body checking, so feeling less anxious around mirrors or reflections or photos of yourself. Wear clothes you like without fear or shame. Show up fully in social settings. And stop obsessing about your appearance in public, and finally feel more at home in your body. In this episode, Dr. Laura shares her personal story of spinal fusion for scoliosis at age 11, the mental toll of growing up in a visibly different body, what that has to do with body dysmorphia, and how she now helps her clients reframe their self-perception through movement, mindfulness, and language shifts. If you've ever struggled to feel at home in your body or that it was fundamentally flawed, this one is for you. I'm Micah Larson, and this is Modern Hysteria, where I ask guest experts to reveal the taboos of women's brains and bodies. Let's get to the episode. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I am so excited to be here with you. I am Dr. Laura Glazebrook. I am a physical therapist, which also means I can be a mental health therapist, a wellness coach, a general guide, and a bit of an expert on all things anatomy and body and everything that is associated with that.
Why do those things all seem to come together when you're working in physical therapy?
Well, I think that one of the things that brought me to physical therapy is the amazing opportunity that we have to connect and build a relationship with people that is kind of unique to therapy, different than a doctor, different than even a nurse, because a lot of times the environment that I work in, I get to see patients one-on-one for an hour at a time, and I get to see them over a longer period of time. So they come to me with whatever issue they're having. I specialize in scoliosis and in pelvic health, hence the earrings.
Yes, please tell us about your earrings.
So, as a pelvic health therapist, I am sometimes surrounded by other professionals who are just as passionate about the female form as I am. So, there's this conference that happens every year for pelvic health providers that's called Pelvicon. So, I get this amazing chance to wear this pair of sparkly pink clitoris earrings. And I also have a pair of clay handmade vulva earrings and not many opportunities to wear them. So I pull them out when I can.
Okay, well, this is the place. I much appreciate the swag for today. And I feel like sparkly pink clitoris earrings might be the grown up version of Lisa Frank.
I'm 100% on board for that. I feel like it's
Okay.
also a vibe. It's also
It's a
a vibe
vibe.
for this year. I feel like it's sort of a rebellion.
Yeah. I mean, the word woman has been
Ugh,
screened
it has.
from all NIH research grants. Is that
It's
correct?
devastating. It's absolutely devastating.
We need anatomy earrings, I think, is
Yes.
one call to action. Laura, how did you get into physical therapy, working specifically with women with birthing people and scoliosis?
Yes, absolutely. My story, how I got interested in PT actually started when I was a child. Someone that's working with scoliosis usually has some kind of background with scoliosis. In my case, I was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was just a kid. I believe I was maybe like 8 or 9. I was really young. So most people get diagnosed when they're teenagers. I was diagnosed a lot earlier. And my curve got very severe. So by the time I was 11, it had been determined that I was no longer eligible for bracing, that I just needed to go in for a surgical correction. So at the tender, ripe, young age of 11, I underwent a very invasive procedure where they put 2 rods on either side of my spine. So most of my spine is fused. And part of that journey is after you have a surgery like that, there is an inpatient physical therapist that will come to the room and get you up and have you start walking and try to do stairs and basically relearn how to walk, which you can imagine after a really big surgery like that is a little bit painful and daunting. But even back in my 11-year-old brain, I thought this is actually a really cool job. Like, this is an amazing way to spend your time to work with people and help them accomplish things physically. So I decided to go into PT. And actually, when I was in PT school, I did some research for pelvic health. And in that case, it was women's health. I do try to be inclusive with my language, but it was technically called a women's health study. And I practiced general PT for several years, but it wasn't until I was pregnant with my son in 2016 when I started to experience some pelvic pain. And I saw a pelvic PT and she was able to change my life. And so I basically stopped what I was doing and trained in pelvic health and started working exclusively with people with pelvic health concerns. Anyone with any genitalia, all genders, can have pelvic floor dysfunction, but usually I see more people with vulvas, people identifying as female, as women. I have personal experience of carrying and delivering 2 babies with my own challenges. And it's just so interesting how every person's journey can be so incredibly individualized, and how I think the system is not supporting us in the way that we need to be supported. And there has to be someone that can be the advocate for somebody who is going through this very transformative, it's a natural process, but it can be daunting. It can be traumatizing. It can be amazing, but we need support. But that's sort of how I started working with birthing people, as my own experience.
That is such a young formative age to have gone through something so intense and invasive. And it's really sticks out to me how much that PT impacted you and how you turned your pain then into purpose. How else do you think your experience with birthing, pregnancy, and scoliosis has impacted your understanding of body image, which is one of our topics we're going to cover today, and what it takes to be resilient with our body changes?
So obviously, we all have biases when we're discussing these topics. So my primary bias is scoliosis. I have, even after the spinal fusion, I have a very asymmetrical spine. Like at my ribs, there's a lot of rotation. So when you look at me from the front, you can't really tell that I have scoliosis. But if I bend over or you see my back, I have a visibly asymmetrical back. And so as you can imagine, I have my own experience of people either making comments about the appearance of my body or that inherent feeling of people looking at your body. So that's I've been in my own mental health therapy for all of that. And I work with people that have scoliosis and spinal fusion. And a lot of us have body image issues. I think it is common with this type of diagnosis, condition, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it a deformity. I really hate that. So I try to call it condition because deformity, there's a visceral feeling when you hear deformity. So I like to call it condition.
Yeah, that seems like a loaded word. Like there's a huge connotation with the word deformity.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us that are even in the scoliosis world, I'm sure in a lot of other types of conditions that have a visible difference, I think there's this shift to trying to call it a condition versus a deformity just because of how it
But
feels.
yeah,
But for a lot of us, we grew up just feeling othered or ashamed just by the way that our body appears. And the thing that's so hard about it, especially when you're growing up with something like scoliosis, there's a lot of our culture is just very much a wait and see. There can be this big feeling of just helplessness and not understanding what's going on with your body or how to fix it. And there is a higher incidence of anxiety and body dysmorphia with people with a spinal condition like scoliosis or kyphosis, which is, the rounding of the back. And a lot of times people are very hyper aware of their appearance. Even if it's not truly body dysmorphia, there's this over awareness and people can be very self-conscious from a young age. So that has been just seeing it all around me. I've developed a very specific toolbox to try to combat some of that.
love to hear what's in the toolbox. First, Laura, could you define body dysmorphia? Because we've talked about like self-conscious, body image issues, body dysmorphia. Like what are we talking about here?
There's, a million different definitions, but I really like the Mayo Clinic's definition. That's basically being extremely preoccupied with a flaw or even a perceived flaw, quotation marks, in appearance that others may not be able to see or may be minor, but it usually involves like a constant checking of your appearance or constantly thinking about or obsessing about a certain appearance or going to great lengths to hide it or feeling that you are deformed or ugly because of it.
So you said that you see a lot of patients who deal with this. What downstream impact does this have on our mental health?
I mean, so much. I think it's the hard thing about body dysmorphia is it's almost like it becomes an obsession to a certain extent, or it becomes this lens with which you perceive yourself, the perception of others perceiving you, and you can actually start to opt out of life because of it. I've had plenty of people say that because of their scoliosis, they keep their hair very long because they don't want people to be able to see their back, or they wear certain colors or certain clothing, or they choose to not go to, like a social event, like a prom or, a wedding or things like that because they are just so terrified of just showing their body in any way.
Yeah, I could see how it affects when and if we decide to like be social.
Mhm.
Where do you think body dysmorphia comes from? That's a very complex question. But if you're to trace it back, like why do we have this fixation?
I mean, I think that it kind of comes down to our society and what we define as beautiful, right? I mean, just having listened to your podcast, I do believe that there's a certain amount of being very focused on what beauty looking like, which is usually a patriarchal, very whitewashed, certain body types only being beautiful. And that really starts from such a young age. I mean, I can remember being a kid when my mother, this was back in the days when my mom would get these magazines and showing all these beautiful smiling faces with perfect teeth and flawless skin and, perfectly styled hair. And it's like almost from birth, we're surrounded by this sometimes subliminal, sometimes overt messaging on what constitutes attractiveness and beauty. And so for those of us who have been socialized as female, it's usually, like a very petite person, very large chested, small waisted, very symmetrical, very lean body mass. And then, I mean, men or people that are socialized, men are impacted as well. They're more muscular, strong, but usually the messaging is more attacking women and people that are socialized as female and very negative on this is how you can change your body, lose 30 pounds by doing this, and just focusing on thinness, you know, perfection, which is really unattainable for 97% of us, So it's like there's some ableism there, there's some sexism, there's some ageism, racism, and it's such a narrow aperture of what beauty can be.
So much of our value in society to other people is based on our appearance. And so, like, if we don't fit into this very narrow definition of beauty, physical perfection, then we are inherently less valuable.
Absolutely true. It's really so sad, so sad.
It's so sad. It's so sad. So you're saying that like our body image issues, self-policing, the body dysmorphia is because we're comparing ourselves to this standard.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a piece of it. I think everybody has a thing that physically they want to change about themselves. For a lot of us that have scoliosis, maybe there's some things that people have said that just sort of live rent free in your head. Um, and a lot of times, maybe it's not even someone who intended to say something to hurt you, but I mean, those negative comments just stick so much more than the positive ones. When I was in PT school, I volunteered to do a posture lab for my fellow students because I said, I know I have scoliosis. I know my body is differently shaped. I stood in front of my class of 25 other grad students, and they picked apart my posture bit by bit, which was hard enough because that was objective language, but there was no emotion in that. But then there was one classmate who turned to me and he said, your back is really messed up. Yes. So, and like those are the types of comments. And rarely, I think some people may have those types of really direct, hurtful comments, but a lot of it's just little like, oh, doesn't that hurt your back? Or, oh, does that bother you? Just like little kind of micro comments that just kind of sit there and you start obsessing over what that means or how other people might be perceiving you because of those interactions.
Totally see how that contributes to anxiety, like you said,
Mhm.
and like self-monitoring all the time and maybe not wanting to be perceived. Yeah.
Yes.
So, how do you think we can shift the narrative from where so much of the messaging around our appearances is that we need to fix flaws
Mhm.
to something that is more neutral? Or do you think we can focus more on the functionality of our bodies rather than like how do we fix ourselves?
Gosh, I do feel like there's a lot of just that fixing yourself as part of our culture as well, just the constant striving, right? Something about just being in that capitalist, you can always improve yourself. There's a little bit of that lives in all of us, but also I feel like there is a still small voice somewhere back there that's trying to tell you, but what if you're perfect the way that you are? So, what I would love to talk about is more what has worked for me, and I think a lot of that revolves around curating what you're taking in, curating it. So if you're on social media, curating your feed, getting rid of anything that makes you feel bad or ugly or less than. And a lot of it for me is I tend to live a lot in my head. And I think a lot of us, especially when we're having body image issues, we tend to live so much in our heads. And it can be really hard to drop back down into our bodies.
Micah here with a quick aside about disembodiment. Disembodiment means you might feel disconnected from your body, like your mind and your body aren't totally working together. You're feeling numb or checked out, or your body isn't really yours. This can happen when we're stressed or anxious or ashamed, especially about our appearances. It's a way that our brains try to protect us by disconnecting, but it can be harmful in the long run. People with body dysmorphic disorder often feel intense shame or fear about how their body looks. And to cope, they might avoid mirrors or physical closeness or even feeling sensation in their body. That is disembodiment, and it can make the symptoms of BDD worse. A 2016 study found that women with BDD often use disembodiment, like dissociation, to cope with their body shame. When we disconnect from our bodies, it's harder to feel present and stay grounded in the moment. We don't really notice what our body needs, like rest or food, and it's much harder to build a healthy relationship with how our body feels, not just how it looks. Okay, that's on disembodiment. Back to the episode.
But being in our bodies where we can use our senses to sort of get back into being present, I feel like is really, really helpful. So one of the things that I find has helped me and a lot of the people that I've worked with is actually just starting by taking like a walk. Just getting out, shutting off the phone, no AirPods, no music, and going for a walk in nature and just being present. So, one of the things that I love about going into nature is paying attention to how much variation there is in nature and looking at the imperfections and the flaws in the trees and in the flowers and how everything is unique and beautiful and perfect just the way that it is. And it's that diversity is what makes it beautiful. Also, just being present, feeling the wind hitting your face, hearing the bird song, just finding that ability to be grateful for the body that's allowing you to feel and sense these things. And it's so much more about being aware of what's around you and less in your head.
That is a great perspective shift. And it feels like the antidote to being really plugged into social media and constantly consuming content that I really want to do an episode on Instagram face and how, oh my gosh, so many filters are like making people look like the same person and then like getting procedures done to actually like look like an Instagram filter. Micah here with a quick aside. Instagram face is a look that has become popular literally based on Instagram filters that makes everybody's face look the same. Smooth, poreless skin, big eyes, long lashes, small nose, big lips. Again, this look usually comes from filters, photo editing apps, but also cosmetic procedures that try to match these features in real life. Apps like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat can make us see filtered beauty as the goal. And that constant comparison can lead to picking apart your appearance, low self-esteem, and increased risk of body dysmorphic disorder. We know the photos are edited and filtered, our brains still compare. A 2022 study published in Frontiers in Public Health found that using Snapchat and Instagram, especially taking selfies using filters and spending lots of hours online, was linked to higher rates of body dysmorphic disorder and greater acceptance of cosmetic surgery. People who always used filters or frequently took and shared selfies had higher levels of body dissatisfaction and were more likely to want cosmetic procedures. I am not demonizing plastic surgery here, but we are talking about very real, sometimes permanent alterations of our face and bodies. This study suggests that social media pressures and beauty filters may fuel unhealthy thoughts about our appearances, especially in young women, and increase the risk for BDD. Social media can distort how we see ourselves, and if you're feeling worse about your appearance after scrolling, it might just be the algorithm doing its job. And like the
So
more we
creepy.
consume that content, yeah, the more we consume that content, the more we tend to like compare ourselves to that norm. And what you just said feels like an antidote to that.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to that episode because
Okay.
I can only imagine. I really feel like too for a lot of us, I'm really leaning into this kind of resisting that productivity mindset as well and creating space in our lives for rest and just not being productive and not striving and pushing for things. Because I think so many of us live with so little margin, time margin, money margin, that we're just chronically burnt out. And that leaves us prone to fixate on all of the things that are bothering us. And then we just, we're exhausted. And that's not a great place for anyone to start from. And certainly, how can you appreciate your body or your life, what you can do if you're so overwhelmed and overburdened that you just can't look outside of that.
That's such a great point. When we're baseline, burnt out, overwhelmed, overstimulated, it's easy to fall into those traps of like self criticism. Can you share some examples of how you help your clients reframe their relationship with their bodies if they're experiencing that body dysmorphia?
For sure. This is one of my favorite subjects because I really believe a lot of this stuff, it's a mindset shift, it's changing your language, it's changing your perspective. So whenever I meet somebody, whether it's a virtual client that I'm working with online or whether it is an in-person patient that I'm seeing for the first time, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that the language that we're speaking to ourselves with is kind or at the very least neutral. So like a scoliosis example, if you have a curve in your upper spine, your thoracic spine, sometimes they call it a rib hump, which I hate that name. So I tried to say, well, let's maybe call it something different. So I really prefer the word curve, like a scoliosis curve, I feel like is much more neutral sounding. And then again, a lot of times people will come in with that, oh, I have this deformity, I'm deformed. So I say, can we call it something else? Can we call it condition? Can we call it your unique anatomy? Can we call it something that feels more neutral or even can feel beautiful? I'm also big about Dr. Hilary McBride's work, how she calls her body a she instead of an it. And I feel it within myself when I speak to my body as a her instead of as an it. I am already predisposed to use kinder language because now
Mm.
I'm talking about a person, a being versus just a meat suit. Which
Yeah, like my sentient meat bag.
yeah,
It deserves
that
like
just carries my
more
head around.
respect. Yeah, my
Yeah.
vessel. Why do you think the language we use changes the game so much?
I mean, there's a lot of other things I feel like we can also do. I mean, giving grace to our bodies, focusing on what we can accomplish rather than how we look, small wins, attainable goals, those types of things. But I think that just looking at how we can start to change that mind that really make a difference. So there's something called neuroplasticity.
Micah here. Neuroplasticity means your brain can change and grow over time. It's how we build new habits and thought patterns. You may remember we covered this in season 1, episode 15 on aging and exercise with movement therapist Angie McClure. But in the context of body image and body dysmorphia, neuroplasticity means you can teach your brain to be kinder to your body. You can unlearn harmful thoughts that you might have repeated for years, and you can build new brain pathways by practicing different ways of thinking. Researchers who wanted to better understand how the brains of people with body dysmorphic disorder were different. So they analyzed 19 studies that used brain scans to study BDD. And here's what they found. People with BDD have differences in the structure and the activity of their brains and how the parts of their brains connect. These differences show up in areas of our brain that control how we see ourselves, literally the visual system, how we manage our emotions, and how we make decisions and focus our attention, which is cognitive control. The researchers believe that BDD may be caused by brain networks not working well together, especially the ones that help us understand how we look and feel. But we know that our brain is not fixed. That's where neuroplasticity comes in. Neuroplasticity means your brain can change and rewire itself over time. So even though people with BDD may have brains that are wired in a certain way, like focusing too much on their flaws or misinterpreting how they look, those patterns can change with the right support. That's why things like therapy, mindfulness, body awareness practice, changing how you talk to yourself, gratitude, sensory connection can actually help us reshape the brain because they help us strengthen more balanced neural pathways and weaken the ones that cause so much distress. We'll talk more about this throughout this episode. Back to back to Laura.
I consider gratitude and how we speak to ourselves as sort of a brain hack. It's a neural pathway, right? So if we can use positive or even neutral language and strengthen that neural pathway, then the other pathways will get pruned. So it's like cerebral gardening, right? And so the less we start to reach for that unkind or just unhelpful language, the less power it has over us. So I think that that ability to choose gratitude and to choose positivity over negativity can already start building our internal resilience because we're not constantly pulling ourselves down, which is different from toxic positivity for sure, because it's not saying everything's great all the time. It's not pretending your body is perfect because nobody's body is perfect.
Micah here with a quick explainer about toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is when people say things like, just love your body, or you should just be grateful, even when you're struggling. It means like skipping over your very real feelings and trying to force only good vibes. In the context of body dysmorphia, toxic positivity might sound like, oh, your body's perfect and you should stop complaining. If you think positive thoughts, you'll feel better. While pieces of this may be true, this can make us feel guilty or ashamed for having hard emotions, and it can shut down real conversations about pain or shame and insecurity. Toxic positivity might feel like pressure to minimize your own feelings and or your discomfort about very real distressing experiences. And in that way, it really hinders vulnerable conversations about body image, mental health, and shame that can keep people from seeking the help they need. And actually, recognizing and addressing the full spectrum of our emotions related to our bodies or body image is really important for us to genuinely arrive at a place of self acceptance and well being. Saying this as someone who aspires to that. Back to the episode.
So it's more just the shift toward body positivity. And again, if that's too hard, then just finding body neutrality, accepting that your body is as it is or as she is, and that that's okay. And it can still be beautiful and it can still be amazing and miraculous just as it is.
Okay, this is a great segue to my next question, which is about gratitude. And I have felt like caught in the trap of the messaging like, well, your body is perfect how it is and you just got to love yourself. And it's like that would be so phenomenal, right? But Shape Magazine says that I have a muffin top. And also, I have beef with Shape Magazine because they
Mm,
literally list like flaws and like how to fix them, right? And we grew up in the
mhm.
golden age of those magazines, I think. So
Yes.
okay, but or what role does gratitude play in building that resilience against body dysmorphia? And how far can gratitude take us? What's the line between gratitude and that toxic positivity that can kind of backfire?
I mean, also shout out to all the magazines, Shape Magazine. I think a lot of women spend a lot of time in therapy, like dismantling a lot of what we've read in those types of magazines.
Yeah.
So I think just sometimes focusing away from what your body looks like to more what you can do with it. For a lot of us, again, I don't want to sound ableist because it's also not based on physically what you can do, but just dropping into your body. And I've actually done this before and suggested this to people who are dealing with really crippling, body image issues and anxiety and things, where you actually just take a day and you make a list of the things that you do and you go back and you just look through the things that you are actually able to do with your bodies. Let's say that you have the ability to walk, even just saying, wow, I can physically get myself out of bed. I can physically, get myself wherever I need to go. I can use my hands to cook, breakfast, like thinking about things in that perspective. I think a lot of times too, because of the messaging we get from society, there's this erasure almost of anyone who has a physical difference or a physical. I don't love the word disability. Some people actually prefer that terminology. But I also, because as a physical therapist, I've worked with a lot of people with physical impairments, people with spinal cord injury who could not use their legs, or people with stroke who cannot speak, who don't have the use of their arms or their hands, or the ability to use our eyes and to see, or the ability to taste food. I think a lot of these things we take for granted so much. And if we just take a moment to think about all of the things that our bodies can truly do, how we can interact with the world around us, and just dropping out of that productivity, soul, hut, hut, hut mindset to just actually thinking about, but what can I actually do? And so I think that it shifts your own perception away from how your body looks and more how can you interact in the world with your body and how amazing can that be?
Mm.
And of course, I think there's a limit to what that can provide for us. Of course, it can't change others' perception of us. It can't change that history of whatever little micro traumas we have endured in our lifetime. So, of course, it can't undo any of that. But maybe it can be an additional filter where you can say two things can be true. I can have these uncomfortable thoughts and sensations and also be so thankful that I can do all these things with my body, that I can feel the wind on my face, that I can, feel the grass under my feet and just being able to appreciate that you are more than the thing that your brain focuses on.
Absolutely. I can see how that becomes a really powerful exercise in mindfulness and and being present. It's so easy, especially if we're consuming a lot of internet, get in our heads about that and it becomes a comparison game.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the algorithms that we are that have been very skillfully built to keep us scrolling, they are very effective at their jobs.
Mhm.
And I mean, it is so easy to just fall into scrolling, paying attention, scrolling, paying attention. So, at the very least, if we're going to be doing that, can we look into following some different accounts that have people that look different? Some people with bigger bodies, some people with differently abled bodies, some people with different cultures, with different backgrounds, with different conditions. Like, can we, if we're going to be scrolling, if we're going to be consuming all this content, at least diversify what we're consuming. So it's not just all this heterogeneous, whitewashed, very patriarchal content over and over again, because then that gets in your head.
So, this might be a little redundant because we did talk about this a bit before, but how does Western culture's obsession with the size of our bodies contribute to body dysmorphia in your patients?
I mean, in the late and early 2000s, there was all of this, thin, 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 and it was really, really pervasive. We actually had a bit of a renaissance of like returning to an actual like healthy body size for a while. And now we're back to that ridiculously small, skeletal, wafy, ideal, which I feel like at the very least is unhelpful, but it's actually harmful to a lot of people because by our genes, there are some people who are built differently. And that doesn't mean that they are not healthy. But I feel like for some people, that just depending on their genetics and depending on their body, they will never be able to get to that size. And actually, for the majority of us, that would be incredibly unhealthy. And we would be sick if we kept ourselves that small. And that leads to a lot of disordered eating, and that leads to a lot of troublesome relationships with food, and that can definitely play into body dysmorphia because that's should have never been the ideal.
This resonates so much with me, particularly right now when I'm in eating disorder therapy and I had like 15-year history of restrictive eating disorders. And now that I've gone through 6 months of nutrition therapy and I'm talking a lot about body image and body dysmorphia and self-acceptance, I look back on pictures of myself, even when I was pregnant, but especially before then, and think, I look so tired and so ill. And how on earth was I absolutely convinced that I was misshapen and needed to like whittle
Ugh.
myself down? And I was also at my most miserable during those times because I was overcome with thoughts about body checking and yeah, body dysmorphia. Okay, quick note about body checking. What is it? Why does it matter? Body checking means looking at your body over and over, assessing how you look, and then doing things like compulsively checking your reflection in the mirror, pinching or measuring or pulling on parts of your body, or asking others compulsively if you look okay. People with body dysmorphic disorder often do these things to feel less worried about their appearance, but instead of having that effect, body checking usually makes the worries worse. And it becomes a cycle that's really hard to break. Body checking keeps your brain focused on what's wrong. And it's highly related to a core feature of body dysmorphic disorder called body image disturbance. which causes people with BDD to see their bodies differently. Body image disturbance means the way you see and feel about your body does not match the way your body actually looks in real life. So this can show up as thinking a body part is literally bigger or smaller than it actually is, feeling very upset about how you look, even if others don't notice anything wrong, and believing your body is not good enough no matter how much you change it. It's not just about appearance, it really affects how you think and feel and act. In one really cool study, researchers used a digital tool called Somatomap 3D, which let people create a 3D avatar of themselves and adjust 23 different body parts to match how they think they look and how they wish they looked. So they studied 61 adults. 31 of them had BDD and 30 didn't. Everyone made two avatars. Again, one that showed their current body and one that showed their ideal body. And the researchers took real measurements of everyone's body parts just to see like how accurate was their self-image. And here's what they found. People with BDD often guessed the size of their body parts wrong. Either they made them too big or too small. They also wished for body parts that were much thinner than what they believed they currently had. And the more off their guesses were, the more unhappy they were with their bodies. And the less they believed, their thoughts might be distorted. Why does this matter? Well, this study is an example of how body image issues and BDD, they are not just emotional, they also involve how we literally see and understand our bodies. Tools like this one can help researchers and therapists better understand how BDD works, how it distorts your thinking, and how to treat it. So, and how can we treat BDD? Studies suggest that therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, can help. There's evidence to suggest that using a CBT based app actually helps people reduce body checking and feel better about their bodies over time. Okay, back to the episode. And it's like it was so underweight and I was convinced that I was huge. And there's so much internalized fat phobia there. And that's what I understood body dysmorphia to be. And now I know I was sick. When I went through menopause, my metabolism really struggled because it was like, we don't know what to do with this body that has been undernourished. And always think I want to shout to the world about like, what is the cost of keeping your body at the small size?
That what is the cost? The cost is it's unpayable. The cost is too much. And there's so many of us that are experiencing that. And I think it also comes a bit from just this societal expectation that women are supposed to keep ourselves small, also in personality, right? Don't be too loud. Don't be too boisterous. Don't be, don't make yourself too known. And so I think that for a lot of us, that manifests as disordered eating and trying to keep our bodies small,
Yeah, take up less space. Always less
Yes,
space.
always
Totally.
less space. And it's incredibly harmful for so many of us. And it tends to affect women more than men. So you don't normally hear men talking about this stuff as much. Maybe they feel it. I'm sure they are affected, but it's mostly women.
Yeah. I mean, there is absolutely the beauty standard for men, but the added layer of gender in a patriarchy, like the misogyny that comes with patriarchal culture, means there's higher stakes. There's more policing of women's bodies, and there's a narrower standard of
Tolerance?
acceptability, right?
Yeah,
Tolerance. Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
when we say body dysmorphia, do you encounter patients who literally have that moment where they're seeing themselves in the mirror and their picture of themselves really doesn't match reality?
Yeah. So I've seen that. I've seen that in both positive and negative ways. One of the things about scoliosis, especially as we get older, is our scoliosis can change and progress and get more, or that asymmetry can get more. So I have seen that it can be so tricky because a lot of what I do revolves around using a mirror to view what's actually happening with your body as you're trying to do your exercise. And that can be a treacherous place for people. A, because a lot of people just don't like looking in the mirror anyway. And then for some people that are unaware of how their body may have changed, that can also be really traumatizing. I think that there's what I've learned in therapy is we have to find a balance of there is a balance between checking obsessively in the mirror and avoiding the mirror. So for the purposes of what I'm doing with a lot of people when we're working on these types of exercises is we need to be able to objectively view what's going on with your body so that you can learn these exercises and make these changes in your posture. If this is too hard to do with a mirror, then we will use the mirror as long as it takes for you to feel in your body what needs to be happening. And so I think that again it goes back to having to try to be objective to understand that your body is what it is. There are parts that we can maybe change a little bit and there are parts that we cannot change. And I think it's about finding that acceptance depending on your belief system. If you believe in a higher power, then like I do, to think that there was not a mistake that was made when your body was made. Your body is perfect for what you were made for. And you can have feelings about it, and you can have things that you don't love. And that doesn't mean it's still not a good body and that it still cannot be perfect the way that it is, even if there are some things that you would wish to change, because we all have them.
This is reminding me of one of my favorite illustrated children's books I got for my son called All Bodies Are Good. And it's really just
Mm,
diverse representation of all different kinds of bodies, tattooed bodies, bigger bodies,
mhm.
smaller bodies, all different types of skin color. Some have body hair. And my goodness, I'm hoping that I'm just like uploading all of those messages to my son into his brain because
Mhm.
that's the antithesis of so much of the content that we grew up on.
For sure. I'm the same. I have a lot of different books with different types of bodies. And I tried to just be so careful about how I speak to myself, how I speak about myself, how I speak about other people. And, to try to just be sure that my language is as neutral as it can be and just explaining that people are built differently and that's okay. And that is how it is supposed to be.
That was actually my next question is how can we shape our children's thinking about this or young people in our lives? How can we help them become resilient and resist body dysmorphia?
Yeah, this is such a prescient topic because of everything that's going on. I don't know if you've heard of adolescence yet, but it's
I
a new
have.
show.
Micah here with a quick aside about Adolescence. It is a 4-episode UK crime drama miniseries now on Netflix US with 96.7 million views as of time of recording. So in the 3 weeks that it has been out, it's become one of the most watched Netflix series ever. Adolescence is about the arrest of a 13-year-old student, Jamie Miller, for the murder of a girl from his school. Adolescence is being framed as like a cautionary tale for parents about how their kids can become radicalized and really slip into toxic masculinity through a niche of internet culture and people called incels or involuntary celibate, which has the connotation of being misogynistic and extreme and even pro violence against women. Co-creator of Adolescence, Stephen Graham, who actually co-stars in the show, said the premise of the show is based on very similar and very real school stabbings that happened in the UK. So that's what Adolescence is. Back to the episode.
I haven't watched it yet, but I do have concerns about raising children in this environment where there are influencers and things that can shape their brains. So for me, what I am trying to do and what I think all of us can do is exactly what you talked about, is making sure that there is representation of different bodies, different races, different shapes, different sizes, different conditions, people in wheelchairs, people without limbs, people who are blind, and showing that there is such a spectrum of people and everyone has equal worth. Everybody has different challenges, but that's a part of living in a human body. Everybody's going to have challenges, and we were not made to be the same. And diversity is beautiful. And for me, a lot of it is just making sure that we're dropping into our bodies and feeling with our bodies. So, one of the things that I do is when I'm talking with my kids about something that's challenging, I try to ask, so how does that feel in your body? Because I've spent a whole adulthood now trying to figure out how to get out of my brain and back into my body. So I'm a big fan of sensual experiences, not sensual like sexual, but of using the senses. So
Mhm.
having that dance party in the kitchen, that can help reshape our brains and help to reset moods, putting some lotion on your skin, breathing deeply, being mindful. And I think that just reinforcing that messaging that we are all unique, and how beautiful is that? And that's the world that we should strive to, where everybody can feel accepted the way that they are and not have to feel they need to make themselves less than or different because society expects something. I think
Mhm.
that would be the ideal.
I really like that you brought up dance parties, and that's like a really actionable, fun, positive way to just practice getting out of our heads and into our bodies. And my son and I like to have chapel roan dance parties, and I've been waiting to pull the trigger on getting a little mini disco ball for those. And now I
Do
think I
it.
have to do that. Make a point
Yes.
of it to make it extra fun.
Yeah, getting yourself a little speaker. It's also great for if, he's ever having a hard time. Like when my kids get really grouchy, I just turn on some music and we just dance and everybody feels so much better. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And that can really stop the spiral of anxiety. I know for me, like it's like changing our state, like
Yeah,
moving. Okay. Done. Investing in disco ball for chapel roan dance parties.
do it.
So we talked a little bit about like guiding young people, but what advice would you give to a listener who knows that they are recognizing right now, I struggle with
Mm.
dysmorphic thoughts about my body, the mirror being like such a big trigger, like avoiding the mirror or body checking in the mirror. What would you say to those listeners?
Well, first of all, you are in good company. The culture we live in is so much. I think most women that I know have some history of some body dysmorphia. So not feeling isolated in that experience is first and foremost. Second, I think just surrounding yourself with positive content. So like this podcast, or listening to people with different voices and seeking out diverse creators looking at different cultures, and maybe even just talking with a friend and someone that's trusted, someone that you respect, and maybe sharing a small piece of that and having a conversation about the things that are bothering you and just getting it out of your head. I have for myself found that EMDR therapy has been really helpful.
Micah here with a final aside about EMDR and body dysmorphia. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a type of therapy that can be really effective in treating body dysmorphic disorder as well as other mental health conditions like PTSD. During EMDR, a therapist helps you think about a painful memory or experience while you follow something with your eyes, like their finger moving back and forth, or tapping or hear sounds. And this back and forth movement helps your brain reprocess the memory in a healthier way. A 2024 study involving 4 female participants with BDD demonstrated that EMDR significantly reduced their BDD symptoms with a recovery percentage of over 60%. So interesting. It actually decreased body shame by 54.82% and increased self compassion by 51.7%. Okay, I know we're in the weeds here, but the idea is that traumatic memories get stuck in your brain, and EMDR helps your brain unstick them so you feel better. After EMDR, people often feel less upset or anxious, more in control of their thoughts, and more compassionate toward themselves. So imagine it like organizing a messy closet. Like you're not throwing away the memory, but you're like putting it in the right place so it doesn't keep jumping out at you. Okay, back to the episode.
And then finding something that you admire about yourself, whether that's physical or whether it's something else. I really admire my ability to tune out my kids being crazy and focus on this. Or I really love the color of my eyes, and just trying to find some kernel of something that you can really admire about yourself, to just start with that neuroplasticity, changing that neural pathway to start looking more for the positive. And I think I'm too lazy and undisciplined to do this myself, but doing like some form of gratitude journaling, of making even just like a bulleted list in your phone and finding one thing each day, like setting a little alarm in your phone, one thing each day that you can put that you are grateful for about yourself, about your life, about your body, and just to kind of hack away at those negative those beliefs and start replacing them with either neutral ones, if that's what is available to you, or if you dare, try the positive and then
Mm.
just chip away at it day by day.
I'm glad you said that, Laura, because that's helping me be accountable in my own eating disorder therapy. My homework in my planner every week is to write down every day something my body helped me do with my son. And it's like I jumped on the trampoline. Like my son wants me to hold him on my lap, and like I can do that. And that
Yeah.
has helped so much, like having those little kernels of concrete things my body can do, allowing me to focus more on function than form, which
Yeah.
we get stuck in a lot.
And I'd even add a layer to that. The next time he wants you to hold him on your lap, just feel the absolute joy that it is to have the weight of your child on you and just his warmth and just the sensation of how you can snuggle him. Cause I can tell you, I don't know how old your son is. My kiddo, he's gonna be taller than me before I know it. My oldest is 8 and he's getting so big. He's almost too big for me to be able to really hold in my lap. But some of my gratitude is I just, when he does want to snuggle me, I try to like just feel every bit of the sensation and just capture that joy because I know that there's going to be a time when he won't be able to fit in my lap and it makes me want to cry. But like I try to be so present in those moments and just remember how precious it is that my body is allowing me to do that and allowing me to feel that.
Mm,
And just it's such a glimmer of joy.
it is. And like you said, it's paving that neural pathway, right?
Absolutely.
Of gratitude, of being in our bodies instead of focusing on
About our
criticizing
bodies.
them.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to cry with you on that
I know.
day.
I'm like,
We'll cry together. I'm
I'm
also
crying with
dreading
you.
that. Okay.
Gosh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mom moment. Yeah, 100%. How can listeners support other people in their lives who may be really struggling with body dysmorphia?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's there's just all that same stuff that I would have mentioned about yourself, but it's sharing those positive thoughts. So if you know somebody that's struggling with this, maybe share this episode with a friend or have a conversation about how you're feeling and how maybe you're struggling so that you can normalize that they're not the only one that's struggling and reminding them that this is such a common thing because of our society and because of the expectations we have of ourselves and then maybe taking them out for one of those walks in nature and pointing out those things of look at this tree over here, look, it's really gnarly and twisted and the leaves do this, but isn't it so beautiful in the way that it's built and it can still
Mhm.
like it's thriving despite all of these things. Just that little mindset shift in that there is beauty in diversity and indifference. And I think that that's what makes the world such an amazing place because how boring would it be if we all looked the same?
Hence the problem we have with Instagram face.
I know. I can't believe people are surgically altering their face to be Instagram appropriate. It's so problematic.
I'm going to have to dig into that in an episode. Laura, our final question is our recurring segment on what is in your bag.
Yes. So I purposefully keep my bag small because it will end up with a million things in it. Everything has air tags because I think I have ADHD and I lose everything. So everything has an air tag.
Love
I
that.
have
Okay.
my clinic office keys with like my business cards on a little like wristlet. I have my wallet, which also has an air tag. I have my AirPod case. I have some more business cards. Have lip balm, lip liner. I have a random $5 bill. Hashtag mom. I have a hand sanitizer spray. I have a
Yes.
pen. I have a little panty liner. I have several pens and I have a little roll on. I got this from one of those free things at the hotel, like a lavender roll on to help you sleep,
Hmm. That
which I
sounds
should probably
soothing.
leave on my bedside table. It's probably a better place for it.
That sounds luxurious. I
It
love
is
that panty
luxurious.
liners are becoming a universal what's in your bag item. I love that for
You
us.
just never know. You never know. You don't want to be caught off guard.
Yeah, 100%. Laura, this was lovely. You're such a breath of fresh air. How can listeners follow you, learn more from you?
Well, thank you for having me. I've had so much fun. I am on Instagram. Show my asymmetrical body. How audacious of me. I am at laura.g.dpt. I have a website at www.drdrlauraglazebrook.com. I have some blogs on there about scoliosis and pelvic health. You can work with me virtually that way. You can sign up for my newsletter. I email my followers about once a month. Occasionally, I do virtual online offers, and I just kind of provide a lot of knowledge on the body and anatomy, and I try to give people little kernels of knowledge on what their body does and how it is amazing just as it is.
I love that. I'm going to link all that stuff in the show notes. Listeners, scroll to find the links to Laura's newsletter and Instagram and her website. Laura, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, friends, let's bring it home. Today, we covered a lot from body dysmorphia to how things like body checking and disembodiment and toxic positivity, even Instagram filters, can shape how we see ourselves. But we also talked about hope, like how neuroplasticity means your brain can change. Tools like CBT and EMDR can actually help us rewire our thought patterns and help us build a more compassionate relationship with our bodies. According to what we learned in this episode, here are a few things we can try this week. Notice when we're body checking and gently interrupt that habit. Curate our social media feeds to include diverse representation of bodies. Practice gratitude for what our bodies do, not just how it looks. And if we're struggling, remember that help is out there and we deserve support and safety in our bodies because they are not a problem to be fixed. Saying this as a reminder to me as much as I'm saying it to you. We are allowed to take up space and rest and heal. If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with a friend who might also need to hear it, or leave a review to help others find this podcast. And if you want more deep dives like this one, make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Substack. You can find me on Instagram at Micah Larson _, and you can follow Dr. Laura Glazebrook at the links in the show notes and even get her free pelvic health self-exam guide there as well. Up next on Modern Hysteria, Season 1, Episode 18 is about pregnancy brain with Parijat Deshpande. And till next time, take care of yourself.